The 2025 NFL season has taught us one thing about football. No matter how good you are or how good your resume is, your job isn't proven. Now, with all that being said, let's begin. Today's video begins in Atlanta. The Atlanta Falcons have just fired head coach Raheem Morris. And not just Raheem Morris, but they've pretty much cleaned house. They have fired everybody. And this is kind of a surprise to me because the Falcons, in their last 5 games, have been 5-0. They beat the Buccaneers, they beat the Cardinals, they beat the Rams at home on Monday night, and they beat the Saints to make sure the Panthers get in the playoffs. Now, Raheem Morris in the last 3 seasons has been very underwhelming. I know this roster has so much talent. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. They just drafted a quarterback, Michael Penix, a year ago. They have Jesse Bates. They have so much talent, and yes, they underperformed, but I don't think the Raheem Morris firing was a smart choice. I know Raheem Morris hasn't been the greatest coach, but this roster was very talented, but I don't think they were going to do good, amazing things in the playoffs, even if they made the playoffs. And I think part of the Raheem Morris firing comes down to, oh, he's been underwhelming. But he just went 5-0 in games that they could have lost. And if you really look at it, week 1, they lost to the Buccaneers by 3 points. Everyone remembers Younghoe Koo missed a kick to force that game to overtime. That's one game that you can't really account on Raheem Morris. And if they win that game, they are in the playoffs. And Raheem Morris wouldn't be fired. And the head coaching staff wouldn't, or the coaching staff wouldn't be fired. That's one game, that's one kind of instance where the Raheem Morris firing doesn't really make sense in my mind because Younghoe Koo missed a kick. That's not on Raheem Morris's fault. That's on the kicker's fault. And the kicker, after that game, gets benched and gets released, goes to Giants, and he wasn't really good on the Giants. And that's not Raheem Morris's fault. That's Younghoe Koo's fault for missing the kick. That could have prolonged that game, and the Falcons could have won that game potentially, and they could have been in the playoffs currently. Another game we have to look at is the Panthers game. Bryce Young had a generational game, 448 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. It's the Falcons' incredible defense. I don't think that's a Raheem Morris fault. I just think that's a defensive fault. In no world should Bryce Young have 448 passing yards on your defense when your defense has played so good this season. That game goes to overtime. Another thing about that game, Michael Penix tore his ACL and missed the rest of the season. That kind of shifts your philosophy in that game because if you're a head coach and your quarterback who you've built this whole offensive or their whole offense around goes down with an injury, now you have a backup veteran quarterback that's going in who hasn't played since last season. That kind of shifts your focus in that game because when you have a rookie quarterback, the best thing you want to do with that rookie quarterback is get him the pieces and build your offense around him to give him that best chance to succeed. And when your rookie quarterback goes down, that focus, that offense that was placed on your rookie quarterback now has to shift to your backup quarterback. And that can be kind of a tough adjustment. And we saw that in that game, and that costed them to lose that game. Even though Bijan had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, Tyler Algier had a touchdown, Drake London went for 119 yards. They still ended up losing that game. And I don't think that's fair on Raheem Morris. Maybe you can account the defense giving up 400 yards to Bryce Young. I think the play calling could be better in that game, but I don't think it's fair to solely blame Raheem Morris for that game because Bryce Young had a generational game and your quarterback goes down in that game, and that shifts your kind of mentality in that game, your focus, your play calling, your scheme in that game because Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix aren't one-to-one quarterbacks. They are not exact replicas of each other with their game style. One is left-handed, one is right-handed, and they play completely different games of football, right? And when you have a starting quarterback, a young quarterback, Michael Penix, you build your offense, you build your scheme around him. You build your offense to make sure he's in the best possible situation to succeed. When he goes down with an injury, Kirk Cousins now has to step in. And now what you built, what that scheme was for Michael Penix, has to now go to Kirk Cousins. And that scheme, that play calling, those plays that you might call, might not benefit Kirk Cousins, and that will ultimately hurt you in that game. But the main game I think that really got him fired this season was the Jets game. In this game, Kirk Cousins is starting after Michael Penix goes down with injury. You're going to the Jets. The Jets are in no place to win. They should not be winning. They should be tanking for a draft pick. Fernando Mendoza's in this draft class. Dante Moore is in this draft class. And why are the Jets wanting to win? In this game, this should be a cakewalk game for you. You should walk into New York. You should handle business. You should get out of there with the win and focus on getting to the playoffs. Because the NFC South is a bad division, has been a bad division for years. The last time the NFC South was actually competitive was Tom Brady's first season in Tampa Bay in 2020 when Drew Brees and Tom Brady were neck and neck for that division, right? Now this division has been bad. So you being going into this game 4-7 doesn't mean you're out of the playoffs. You just went out and you're in. And they almost did that, but this game proves that they were bad. And I think this is one of the games that you can account for to why Raheem Morris has been fired. But when you look at all the other games this season, week 1, I said Younghoe Koo missed a kick that would have forced overtime. Can't really account that on him. Bryce Young had a generational game. Maybe that's bad play calling, but also your quarterback goes down and that changes your scheme and that changes what you want to do in that game. I wouldn't count that on him. I think in the Panthers game, when they in Carolina week 3, when they lost 30-0, I wouldn't necessarily say that's on him because you held Bryce Young to 121 yards. Chuba Hubbard, yeah, he ran for 73 yards, and Rico Dowdle ran for 30 yards, but your quarterback played terrible. Your quarterback went 18 of 36, 172 yards, and 2 interceptions. That's not on you as a coach. That's on you having a young quarterback who's adjusting to playing in tough situations, and he didn't show up in that game. That's not on Raheem Morris. That's on the quarterback. I think there are games where you can say, oh yeah, Raheem Morris is a bad coach. But there are also games where you can say, the situation wasn't favorable. There were things that went wrong in that game that weren't favorable for Raheem Morris. And let's look at the teams he's beaten this season. He beat the Rams and Matthew Stafford is an MVP candidate, who he picked off for his defense, forced 3 turnovers on Matthew Stafford, an MVP candidate, and right now could possibly be the front runner for MVP. He beat Josh Allen and the Bills. That's no easy game to beat. That Josh Allen is no easy team to beat. And here's the thing. Josh Allen's defense and the Bills' defense has been terrible this season. But it wasn't the defense that led him up in this game. It was Josh Allen. Raheem Morris' defense held Buffalo to 14 points and had 2 interceptions against Buffalo. And their defense held Atlanta to 24 points. 24 points is a lot. But holding Buffalo, Josh Allen's Buffalo Bills, who have been so good recently in the past few years, held them to 14 points. That's good coaching from Raheem Morris. I think there are games where Raheem Morris' coaching staff and Raheem Morris have let down their team. But I don't think you can necessarily say that it's Raheem Morris' sole fault for his shortcomings and the Falcons' shortcomings this season, especially when you look at his schedule. He won 4 games out of his last 4 games. I think if you beat the Jets, which that should have been a game that you win, if you beat the Jets, yeah, you're in the playoffs. If Younghoe Koo doesn't miss that kick, you go to overtime, maybe you're in the playoffs. If Bryce Young doesn't go for 400 yards against you and you win and Michael Penix doesn't get hurt, you're in the playoffs. The situations that were in this game, only a couple of those games can be accounted for on Raheem Morris, but some of those games, the situation that happened wasn't favorable for you to win. Now, moving on. Kevin Stefanski got fired. I honestly like this firing. Now, Kevin Stefanski has been with his team for 5 years. Kevin Stefanski, in those 5 years, has had 3 playoff appearances, has had 2 Coach of the Years, has had some elite defenses, has had talent, and what has that amounted to? Or two playoff appearances. What has that amounted to? 1 playoff win. 1. And that was 2020 against the Steelers. And the thing is, about that game, Kevin Stefanski wasn't even coaching in that game. Kevin Stefanski got COVID before that game, or before the days leading up to that game. So he had to be home. And so they had a coach step in for Kevin Stefanski to coach them in that game to win. So does that even count as a playoff win on Kevin Stefanski's resume? No. He was at home with COVID while another coach took his place and led them. Yes, he won Coach of the Year that year. 2023, Deshaun Watson goes down with injury. Joe Flacco steps in. Joe Flacco comes back. Incredible season for Joe Flacco, stepping in, leading them to the playoffs. He wins Coach of the Year again. They go to Houston in the wild card round. And keep in mind, Cleveland's defense that season was top 3 in the NFL. And what does that lead to? Them getting exposed. Houston going berserk on Cleveland. Houston outplayed Cleveland. The defense outplayed Cleveland. The offense got outplayed. And Kevin Stefanski was coaching that game. Kevin Stefanski's record is 46-58 with Cleveland. Kevin Stefanski this season had an incredible defense. Had the second best defense in football. What did that lead to? No success at all. And I know the offense wasn't good. Yes, the offense was terrible for them. But you go 5-12, and Kevin Stefanski had a credible defense. You had a player break the sack record. And he's not even in MVP talks because your team went 5-12. Myles Garrett has one of the greatest defensive seasons of all time, and you're not in talks for MVP because your team's 5-12. Kevin Stefanski, I think, has built a great defense, and I think the general manager of the Browns has built a great defense and has had a great defense for a few years now. I know last year was a down year, but I think Kevin Stefanski, it's time to go. Because Kevin Stefanski had a great defense 2020. 2023 had a great defense, had an amazing defense this year. And in each of those years, it hasn't amounted to any real success except maybe a wild card or you made it to the divisional. And I know that year where you made it to the divisional, that was a very good year for you. As a Browns fan, if you're a Browns fan, you look at that season and you say, wow, we just made it to the divisional. Wow, we beat a division rival in Pittsburgh who at one point was 11-0. And then you go to KC and you lose, which this year, Kevin Stefanski, I don't think the Browns expected their defense to be as good as it was. And I don't think anybody expected Myles Garrett to have the season he had for Kevin Stefanski to get fired. Because Kevin Stefanski he's had playoff success. Or not playoff success, he's had success. He's taken them to the wild card. But when you look at this season in retrospect, the Browns defense being as good as it was, and for their record to be as bad as it was, that shows you everything you need to know. Their offense was bad, but their defense was amazing. Their offense could have been worked on in the offseason, and instead they focused on the defense, which I think is smart. You build through the trenches of the defense. But also, in the draft, the Browns draft 2 quarterbacks. 2. In the 3rd round, they go with Dylan Gabriel. And in the 5th round, they go with Shedeur Sanders. Now, Shedeur Sanders, I think, intentionally fell in the draft by teams because teams didn't really necessarily want him, which I don't think is fair to Shedeur because he's exceeded those 5th round draft pick expectations by a lot. But if your plan was to draft Shedeur, what's the point in drafting Dylan Gabriel to begin with? Because Dylan Gabriel, it played 8 games, right? 5 games. He played X amount of games. Gets a concussion, you put in Shedeur, and then you start Shedeur after that, and Shedeur exceeds expectations. So why is Shedeur sitting on the bench for that long, Kevin Stefanski? Why is he sitting on the bench? If Dylan Gabriel gets hurt, you put in Shedeur, he exceeds your expectations that you had for Shedeur, and you start Shedeur. Why was he sitting on the bench all season long? Why was it that in that game where Shedeur Sanders steps in against the Ravens, that Shedeur Sanders says, I have had no first-team reps all season long? I get it. Going into that season, you had 4 quarterbacks on your roster. You had Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, Dylan Gabriel. But you trade Joe Flacco to the Bengals. You trade Kenny Pickett to the Raiders. Shedeur Sanders is your quarterback 2 on the roster. Why is he not getting 4 first-team reps in practice? I know you're trying to develop your quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, because he's your quarterback 1 right now. But why is your quarterback 2, who's also a rookie, who's younger, not getting first team reps? That just baffles me. And I think all of this can be accounted to why Kevin Stefanski got fired and why it makes sense for him to get fired. Now, in our next topic, we're going to talk about Pete Carroll and his firing. I think from the beginning, Pete Carroll should have never been signed. Pete Carroll was a great head coach for the Seattle Seahawks. Pete Carroll did amazing things at USC 20 years ago. Pete Carroll was the head coach for the Patriots from 1997 to 1999, got fired for Bill Belichick. Now, I don't think he should have been signed to begin with in Las Vegas. Because going into this, Pete Carroll was 73 years old. 73 as a head coach in the NFL. He's 74 currently. I don't think signing a 73-year-old head coach, or I don't think signing a 73-year-old to be your head coach is a smart decision in any situation. Because he's 73. This team was never meant to do good things this season. This team built a roster, but they weren't going to say, oh, we built this roster and we're going to go out and make a Super Bowl. We're going to go out and make the playoffs. No, this roster was never meant to compete. This roster, they draft Ashton Jeanty, which I think was a great pick, and his O-line has just let him down. Geno Smith, I think the thing about Geno Smith, he had one good season in a situation where that was favored towards him. Like I said with the Falcons, you build your team around a quarterback and you build your system around a quarterback. And I think that 1 year with Seattle where he took them to the playoffs, that system was built around him and it was built for him to succeed. And then the next year we see when teams see that that system was built just for Geno and that system was built around Geno, Geno gets exposed. So I don't think Geno was necessarily really ever a great quarterback. And you bring him in doesn't change anything. I think if you're the Raiders, why would you bring in a 73-year-old head coach? Because this team was never meant to compete. I know Pete Carroll has a great resume. I know he's taken the Seattle Seahawks to 2 Super Bowls. And he did stuff at USC, right? But if your team isn't built to compete now, then why would you bring him in? Because he's 73. If my logic is correct, you have a terrible team that goes 3-14, gets the number 1 overall pick. You have a 74-year-old head coach. Let's say they draft Fernando Mendoza next year. By drafting Fernando Mendoza, that doesn't mean you're just immediately going to be playoff contenders with Fernando Mendoza. Unless you dramatically shake up the whole team, which I don't see happening, you're not going to be a contending team with Fernando Mendoza immediately next season. Maybe by year 2 and year 3, you're going to be contending. But this roster isn't good enough to contend next year, even with Fernando Mendoza. And so why would you bring Pete Carroll in as a 74-year-old head coach if you're rebuilding, if you're at the earliest stage of rebuilding? You're not rebuilding ready to contend with one move. No, you're rebuilding at its earliest stage, ready to sell house, ready to trade everybody, get a lot of draft picks and build through the draft and build with cap space. No. So with that logic, you're telling me by 2 years, 3 years down the line, you're sending a 77-year-old, 75-year-old, 76-year-old head coach to head coach a playoff game for you. I get it. A lot of people can have their own age that they will start to regress. But 74 years old, I don't think that he's too old to be coaching. Especially a head coaching job in the NFL. I know he's been a great head coach, but I didn't like the signing for him to be a head coach to begin with. Now, with our last and final topic for today, I'm going to talk about the Jonathan Gannon firing. So this is going to be very short. Jonathan Gannon, I like this firing. I'm an Eagles fan, and Jonathan Gannon in 2023 as our defensive coordinator helped lead us to the Super Bowl. He was pretty much the captain of that defense from a coaching staff perspective. And that season, we had an incredible defense, which was kind of the forefront of why we went to the Super Bowl that season. Without that defense, I don't think we even go past the divisional round that season. And Jonathan Gannon, I think, was fully deserving of a head coaching job, but I like this firing. Jonathan Gannon, in the 3 years he's been, or the 2 years he's been with him, was 15-36 as a head coach. That's not good. That's As a head coach, that's not a good record. I know his roster hasn't really been favorable for him, but what roster building has he done? He brought in Hassan Reddick, the former Eagles player. Or wait, no. Hassan Reddick signed with the Eagles. My bad. He brought in Josh Sweat this offseason, a former Eagles player. He built through the draft. He made it a good defense, but that's like, he's done roster building moves, but the roster hasn't done anything good. And as a head coach, that reflects on you. Even if you have a solid roster, if you're not being able to coach them to win games, then that reflects on you as a coach. Kyler Murray, I think, is gone this offseason, but Kyler Murray should have been gone a year ago. Marvin Harrison, obviously injury stuff, but also Amari DeMarcado against the Titans. Obviously, he fumbles on the 1 yard line, causes a touchback, you lose that game. Why are you on the sidelines ripping him? Why are you yelling at him, being physically aggressive towards your own player in front of everybody on that team? That reflects on you as being kind of incompetent. Because as a head coach, yes, you want to get on your players when they make a mistake, but you verbally yelling at him, being very aggressive and violent towards your own player, that's not a recipe for winning. That just beats down your player to not even want to play for you anymore, and that ruins the morale of your team. And I think the Jonathan Gannon firing was fair. I think he deserved to be fired. I think he hasn't amounted to any success. I think he's done solid roster building, but even with the roster building he's done, he hasn't done anything with the roster building. He hasn't been able to coach this team to any success. Now, with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and there will be more to come soon. Have a good day, everybody.